My boyfriend broke my arm. Please help. The text was meant for her best friend. Instead, it reached the one man and soul who makes the police look like choir boys. I'm tracing your signal now. Stay alive for 10 minutes. Una slumped against the peeling wallpaper of the hallway corner, her afro matted with dust and sweat. Her right arm hung at a sickening, impossible angle, heavy and useless against her side. The grimy floorboards bit into her skin, but the cold was a mercy compared to the fire screaming through her bone. She stared at the cracked screen, her vision blurring as a Reed receipt flickered back, not from her friend, but from a number she didn't recognize. Una, I know you're in there. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Minjun's voice was terrifyingly calm on the other side of the door, the voice of a man who thought he owned every breath she took. Just minutes ago, those hands had been around her throat. Just seconds ago, he had twisted her arm until it gave way with a sound she would never forget. Across the city, in a penthouse that smelled of expensive leather and cold steel, Kangdi adjusted his cufflink. His white shirt was crisp, his tattoos hidden beneath the silk, but his eyes were fixed on the desperate message on his phone. He broke my arm. Please help me. He didn't know the woman in the dirty corner. He didn't care about domestic disputes, but something in the raw, unadulterated terror of that text stirred a monster that had been bored for far too long. He stood up, the leather couch creaking under his weight. You won't believe what happened next. Sit tight and don't skip a bit. Where are you watching from? Drop your country and city in the comment section so I can send you special regards. And also, hit the subscribe button on your screen to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss out on the next. Now let's dive deep into the story. The wood of the door didn't just splinter, it exploded. Una screamed, a ragged, thin sound that died in her throat as the frame gave way under a force far greater than Minjun's rage. For a heartbeat, the hallway was a blur of shadows and dust. Minjun, caught off guard with his hand still raised to strike the door again, spun around, his face contorting from arrogance to pure, unadulterated confusion. He didn't have time to speak. A heavy, polished boot connected with his chest, sending him flying backward into the small kitchen table. The sound of cheap plastic snapping and metal legs scraping against the linoleum echoed through the cramped apartment. Una pressed herself further into the corner, her fingers digging into the grime of the floorboards. Her breath came in shallow, jagged hitches. Through the haze of her pain, she saw him. Kangdi stepped over the threshold like he was walking into a boardroom, not a crime scene. His white shirt was blinding against the dingy yellow light of her hallway. He didn't look at her at first. His gaze was fixed on Minjun, who was scrambling to find his footing amidst the wreckage of the kitchen. Who the hell are you? Minjun hissed, wiping blood from his lip. He reached for a glass bottle on the counter, his knuckles white. This is my house. This is my woman. Get out before I. Kangdi moved with a clinical, terrifying grace. Before Minjun could finish his threat, Kangdi was across the room. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need one. He caught Minjun's wrist in a grip that looked effortless, yet Una heard the sickening pop of a joint being forced past its limit. Minjun let out a high-pitched wail, the bottle shattering on the floor. You like breaking things? Kangdi's voice was a low, melodic rumble, devoid of any warmth. It was the sound of a landslide, slow, heavy, and final. He leaned in closer to Minjun's face, his expression as calm as a frozen lake. I find that people who break what doesn't belong to them eventually run out of things to lose. He didn't wait for an answer. With a sharp, practiced shove, he sent Minjun spiraling toward the two men who had appeared in the doorway behind him. They were dressed in dark suits, silent as ghosts, and they caught Minjun by the armpits, dragging him out into the hall. Minjun's protests were silenced by a single, muffled blow that left the apartment suddenly, hauntingly quiet. Only then did Kangdi turn. Una flinched as his shadow fell over her. She tried to pull her broken arm closer to her chest, a reflex that sent a fresh wave of white-hot agony through her nervous system. She looked up, her afro haloed by the dim light, her eyes wide and brimming with tears she refused to let fall. She looked at his tattoos, the dark ink peeking out from his collar and disappearing under his cuffs, dragons and tigers winding around his skin like ancient warnings. He knelt in front of her. The movement was slow, deliberate, designed not to startle a wounded animal. Up close, he smelled of sandalwood and expensive tobacco, a scent that didn't belong in this world of mold and cheap beer. "Yuna," he said. It wasn't a question. He knew her name. He had tracked her life in the 10 minutes it took to drive here. I sent the text to the wrong person," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to involve you. I didn't know who you were." Kangdi reached out. For a second, Yuna braced herself for another blow, another twist, another lesson in her own powerlessness. Instead, his hand, large, warm, and calloused, rested gently beneath her chin, tilting her face up to meet his. His eyes weren't filled with the chaotic fire of Minjun's anger. They were deep, dark pools of calculation. "You did send it to the wrong person," he agreed softly. He shifted his gaze to her arm, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as he saw the bruising already turning a deep, angry purple against her skin. Any other man would have called the police. They would have taken a report, asked you 100 questions, and left you here to wait for him to come back. He stood up, offering her his hand. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command disguised as a gesture of grace. "I don't take reports, Yuna, and I don't leave things unfinished." She looked at his hand, then back at the empty doorway where her nightmare had just been dragged away. She was terrified of the man standing over her. She knew, with a bone-deep intuition, that the mercy he had shown her was a byproduct of his own darkness, not a sign of his goodness. But as she reached out with her good hand and let his fingers close around hers, she realized that for the first time in 4 years, the air in the room didn't feel like it was running out. He pulled her up with a strength that made her feel weightless. As she stumbled, her lightheadedness finally catching up to her, he caught her against his chest. The silk of his shirt was cool against her tear-stained cheek. "Where are you taking me?" she breathed, her forehead resting against his shoulder. "Somewhere he can never find you," Kangdi said, his voice hardening as he looked out at the city lights. "Somewhere you'll learn that the only person allowed to be dangerous in your life is me." He swept her up into his arms, ignoring her small gasp of surprise. As he carried her out of the apartment, past the blood on the floor and the echoes of her old life, Yuna closed her eyes. She had prayed for a savior, and the universe had sent her a king. But as the heavy door of the black sedan clicked shut, sealing them in a world of tinted glass and hushed engines, she couldn't help but wonder what the price of her rescue would be. The transition from the chaos of the apartment to the silence of Kangdi's world felt like falling into a deep, dark well of silk. When Yuna finally opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed wasn't the pain in her arm, but the stillness. There was no sound of shouting neighbors, no rattling pipes, and no heavy footsteps packing the room above her. She was lying on a bed so soft it felt like it might swallow her whole. The sheets were a cool, high thread count gray, smelling faintly of the same sandalwood scent that had clung to Kangdi. She tried to sit up, but a sharp, localized throb in her right arm reminded her of the previous night. Looking down, she saw that her arm was no longer hanging at a broken angle. It had been expertly set and encased in a clean, white cast. Someone had even cleaned the grime from her skin and replaced her torn cardigan with a soft, oversized silk robe. Panic flared. Who had touched her? Who had undressed her while she was unconscious? "My nurse is a professional. She has worked for my family for 20 years. The voice came from the shadows near the window. Yuna gasped, clutching the robe to her throat with her good hand. Kangdi was sitting in a high-backed velvet chair, a glass of amber liquid resting on his knee. He wasn't wearing his jacket anymore. His white sleeves were rolled up, revealing the intricate black ink that spiraled down his forearms, claws and scales that seemed to move in the dim morning light. "Where am I?" Yuna's voice was barely a croak. "My home," he said simply. He stood up and walked toward the bed. "Or one of them. It is a fortress. There are men at every gate, cameras in every hall. You are currently the safest person in Seoul." Yuna looked around the room. It was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a misty mountain range she didn't recognize. The furniture was minimalist and expensive, the kind of luxury that felt cold and untouchable. It was a golden cage, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. "I can't stay here," she whispered, her heart starting to race. "I have a job, I have things." "You had a life of fear," Kangdi corrected, his eyes locking onto hers. He stood at the foot of the bed, his presence filling the room until the air felt heavy. "The man who did this to you is being handled, but men like him have friends, they have grudges. If you walk out that door today, you are a target. If you stay here, you are under my name." "And what does that mean?" Yuna asked, her fear sharpening into a sudden, desperate spark of defiance. "To be under your name? Am I your prisoner? Is this just a different kind of closet for me to hide in?" Kangdi's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He moved closer, leaning over the footboard. "A prisoner cannot leave. You can leave whenever you wish, Yuna. I will even provide the car. But understand this. Once you step outside my protection, I am no longer responsible for what happens when the shadows find you." He paused, his gaze dropping to her cast. "You spent 4 years being broken by a man who was weak. You are terrified because you think I am just a bigger version of him. I am not." He walked around to the side of the bed and set a small, black smartphone on the nightstand. "That phone has one number in it. Mine. There is a wardrobe in the next room with clothes in your size. Eat the food the staff brings you. Rest. When you are ready to decide if you want to be a victim or a guest, call me." As he turned to leave, Yuna found her voice again. "Why did you answer? Out of all the people in this city, why did you come for me?" Kangdi stopped at the door, his hand on the handle. He didn't turn back, but she saw his shoulders tense. "Because everyone else ignores the noise," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. "And I have always had a habit of silencing it." The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving Yuna alone in the silence. She looked at the black phone on the table, then at the vast, beautiful landscape outside. She was no longer being hit, but as she looked at the expensive silk covering her skin, she realized the Beauty and the Beast story she had stumbled into was far more complicated than the fairy tales suggested. The Beast hadn't just saved her, he had claimed her. She reached out with her trembling left hand and touched the phone. She wasn't ready to call him, but for the first time in years, she wasn't looking for a way to run. She was looking for a way to survive the man who had just handed her the world. The silence of the mansion was not peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. For the next 3 days, Yuna moved through the vast, marble-floored halls like a ghost. Her arm throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that served as a constant reminder of the life she had left behind. Every time she caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors, a tall black woman wrapped in expensive, charcoal-colored silks, her afro styled and soft against the backdrop of a brutalist Korean fortress. She felt like an imposter in a high-stakes play. She had everything she could ask for: gourmet meals served on bone china, a library of books she had never had time to read, and a bathroom the size of her old apartment. Yet the luxury felt like a weight. She spent hours watching the guards from her window. They moved with a synchronized, lethal precision, their earpieces glinting in the sun. They weren't protecting a home, they were guarding a crown. On the 4th evening, the heavy silence finally broke. A sharp, insistent buzzing came from the nightstand. Yuna flinched, her gaze darting to the black smartphone Kangdi had left her. She hadn't touched it since the morning she woke up. Heart hammering against her ribs, she picked it up with her left hand. The screen displayed no name, only a string of zeros. She answered, "Hello." "The kitchen," Kangdi's voice was like velvet over gravel. "I'm told you haven't touched your dinner. Come down." It wasn't a request. The line went dead before she could protest. Yuna took a deep breath, smoothing the silk of her robe. She found her way through the labyrinthine corridors, guided more by the scent of simmering spices than by memory. The kitchen was a cavernous space of stainless steel and industrial heat, but it was empty of staff. Only Kangdi was there, sitting at a long, dark wood breakfast bar. He had swapped his suit jacket for a black turtleneck that made his pale skin and dark tattoos pop with a dangerous elegance. Before him sat 2 bowls of jampong, a spicy seafood noodle soup, the steam rising in red, fragrant clouds. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the stool beside him. Yuna sat, the height of the stool making her feel vulnerable. "I wasn't hungry." "Liar," he said softly, sliding a pair of chopsticks toward her. "You're starving. You're just afraid that if you accept my food, you accept my world." Yuna looked at the soup, then at him. "Can you blame me? I don't even know who you really are, Kangdi. I know you're powerful. I know you're dangerous. But I don't know why I'm here instead of a hospital or a police station." Kangdi took a slow sip of tea, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "The police are a bureaucracy of mirrors. They see what they are paid to see. If I had sent you there, Minjun's family would have reached you before the first bandage was changed. His father is a mid-level politician with just enough ego to believe his son's indiscretions can be buried." Yuna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "His father? I didn't know. Minjun never told me." "Because he wanted you isolated," Kangdi said, his voice hardening. "He wanted you to think he was the highest authority in your life. He was wrong." "And what about you?" Yuna challenged, her voice trembling but holding its ground. "Are you the new authority? Is this a debt I'm accruing? I don't have money, Kangdi. I have nothing but a broken arm and a phone with your number in it." Kangdi set his tea down with a deliberate click. He leaned in, his scent, sandalwood and something metallic like rain on a blade, overwhelming her senses. "You think I want your money or your gratitude? I am the head of the Dongpa. My debts are paid in blood and territory. You sent a message to the wrong number, Yuna. In my world, there are no accidents. There is only fate and the strength to seize it." He reached out, his thumb grazing the edge of her cast. "You were a girl who was being broken. Now you are a guest of the White Tiger. That carries a price, but not one you think. The price is that you can never go back to being small." Before she could respond, the heavy steel doors of the kitchen swung open. One of the suited men from the apartment, the one Kangdi called Sangwoo, stepped in. His face was grim, a tablet held in his hand. "Sir, we have a problem." Kangdi didn't look away from Yuna. "Speak." "Minjun has disappeared from the holding site," Sangwoo reported, his voice tight. "He didn't escape. He was taken. We found 3 of our men dead at the perimeter, professional work, silencers and high-velocity rounds." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kangdi stood up slowly, the calm grace he usually carried replaced by a terrifying, predatory stillness. "Who?" "The Namgil Syndicate," Sangwoo replied. "They're using the boy's disappearance to trigger a jurisdictional war with his father's office. They're telling the politician that we murdered his son. They're looking for the girl, sir. They know she was the trigger." Yuna's stomach twisted. The wrong number text hadn't just saved her, it had ignited a powder keg. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was evidence. She was a liability. Kangdi turned to her. For a moment, she expected to see regret in his eyes, expected him to realize that she wasn't worth the trouble of a gang war. Instead, she saw a flicker of something that looked almost like satisfaction. "It seems your old life is trying to knock on my door," he said, his voice a low, lethal purr. "What are you going to do?" Yuna whispered. "Namgil is a scavenger," Kangdi said, more to Sangwoo than to her. "He thinks he can use a broken girl to move into my docks. He thinks because I brought a stranger into my home, I have grown soft." He walked over to a cabinet, pulling out a small, sleek handgun. He checked the magazine with a metallic snick that echoed through the kitchen, then tucked it into the small of his back. "Sangwoo, move the girl to the sub-level bunker. Double the perimeter. If a single soul breathes near her door without my clearance, end them." "Wait," Yuna stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "You can't just lock me away again. This is exactly what Minjun did." Kangdi stopped at the door. He turned, his gaze raking over her, the injured black woman in silk, standing defiant in the heart of a Mafia stronghold. A small, dark smile touched his lips. It wasn't kind, but it was the first time he had looked at her as a person rather than a project. Min Jun locked you away because he feared you would leave, Kang Di said. I am locking you away because I am about to burn this city until the men who want to hurt you have no ground left to stand on. He stepped toward her, his hand coming up to cup the back of her neck. His grip was firm, a tether in the storm. Stay in the dark for a few hours, Yuna. When the sun comes up, you'll find that the shadows have been dealt with. He leaned down, his lips brushing her forehead, a gesture so unexpectedly tender it made her breath hitch. Then, as quickly as the moment had come, he was gone, his men trailing behind him like a wake of sharks. Yuna stood in the empty, gleaming kitchen, the spicy soup growing cold on the counter. She looked at her cast, then at the door. She was being protected by a monster to keep the wolves at bay. As Sangwoo stepped forward to lead her to the bunker, Yuna felt a new kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of being hit or broken. It was the fear of what she was becoming, a woman who was starting to prefer the monster's protection to the world's mercy. She followed Sangwoo into the depths of the mansion, the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in the silence. The war had begun, and whether she liked it or not, she was the prize. The bunker was not the concrete cell Yuna had expected. It was a subterranean suite, lined with reinforced steel and soundproofed so thoroughly that the world above ceased to exist. She sat on the edge of a leather sofa, the silence ringing in her ears. Time lost its meaning. She didn't know if minutes or hours had passed since the heavy doors hissed shut, but the adrenaline that had sustained her in the kitchen was beginning to curdle into a cold, hollow ache. When the door finally chimed and slid open, it was Sangwoo who entered. Kang Di walked in slowly. The crisp white shirt he had worn earlier was gone, replaced by a simple gray t-shirt that was dark with sweat and flecked with something deeper, the unmistakable rust brown of dried blood. He didn't look like a king now. He looked like a man who had spent the night in the dirt. He didn't speak. He went straight to a small wet bar in the corner, his movements stiff and uncharacteristically heavy. He poured a glass of water, drained it, and then sank into the armchair opposite Yuna. He leaned his head back, eyes closing, his throat working as he swallowed. Is it over? Yuna asked, her voice small in the vast room. For tonight, he murmured. He didn't open his eyes. The Namgil had a warehouse near the docks. They won't be using it again. Yuna looked at the blood on his sleeve. She thought of the Reed receipt on her phone, the accidental lifeline she had thrown into the dark. You could have died tonight, for someone you don't even know, someone who sent a text to the wrong person. Kang Di opened his eyes then. They were bloodshot, the cold calculation replaced by a weary, haunting transparency. He looked at her, really looked at her, not as a piece on a chessboard, but as a person. I didn't answer because I'm a hero, Yuna, he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. He reached out, his fingers tracing a jagged, white scar that ran along the underside of his forearm, peeking out from beneath his ink. My mother used to send messages like yours, not on a phone, but with the way she looked at the door, the way she moved through the house like she was trying to be invisible. The air in the bunker felt thick. Yuna held her breath, watching the way his jaw tightened. My father was a man of high standing in the syndicate. He was respected, feared, and a pillar of the community. But inside our walls, he was a butcher. Kang Di's gaze shifted to the wall behind her, seeing a ghost she couldn't see. One night, she finally found the courage to ask for help. She didn't have a phone. She ran to the neighbor, a man my father had played cards with for a decade. Do you know what that man did? Yuna shook her head slowly, her heart breaking for the boy he had been. He called my father. He told him his property had escaped and was making a scene. Kang Di's laugh was a short, bitter bark. That neighbor thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was being loyal to the power. My mother didn't survive that night. He looked back at Yuna, his expression softening into something raw. When your message appeared on my screen, he broke my arm, I saw her. I saw the moment the neighbor picked up the phone to betray her. For 20 years, I've had all the power in this city, and it's meant nothing. It's just noise. But that text, It was the first time someone asked for help and reached the monster instead of the good neighbor. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I didn't answer because I'm a good man. I answered because I wanted to be the man the neighbor wasn't. I wanted to see what happens when the monster actually shows up to protect the person being hunted. Yuna reached out, her left hand hovering over his. For the first time, she didn't feel the gap between the black girl from the slums and the Korean king of the underworld. They were just two people who had been defined by the hands that had tried to break them. "You're not a monster to me, Kangdi," she whispered. He didn't pull away when her fingers finally touched his. He just closed his eyes, a single, shaky breath escaping him. In the silence of the bunker, the world was still dangerous, but for the first time, the cage didn't feel so small. The shift began the next morning, not with words of comfort, but with a pair of boxing wraps laid out on the edge of the mahogany dining table. Kangdi was already there, his knuckles taped, a rhythmic thud hiss echoing from a heavy bag he had moved into the sun-drenched terrace. He didn't look like a man who had bared his soul in a bunker the night before. He looked like a weapon being recalibrated. "The cast comes off in 3 weeks," Kangdi said without turning around. "Until then, you have a left hand, 2 legs, and a mind. Most people die because they forget they have more than one way to strike." Yuna stood in the doorway, her silk robe feeling suddenly absurd. "I'm not a fighter, Kangdi. I'm a student. I was supposed to be finishing my degree." "You were a victim," he countered, finally stopping the bag with a flat palm. He turned to her, his eyes hard and focused. "The world doesn't care about your degree when it's pressing you into a corner. Minjun knew you wouldn't hit back. The Namgil believe you're a prize to be snatched. They all rely on your passivity. I'm going to take that away from them." He walked over, picking up the wraps. "Sit." For the next 2 hours, the terrace became a classroom of a different kind. He didn't teach her how to throw a flashy punch. He taught her how to find balance. He showed her how to use her height and the reach of her long legs to keep a man at a distance. Because her right arm was immobilized, he taught her how to turn her body into a shield, using her shoulder and hips to deflect weight. "Don't look at my face," he barked when she hesitated during a footwork drill. "Look at my center, my chest, my breath. If I move, you move. You are not waiting for me to hit you. You are waiting for me to give you an opening." The physical exertion was grueling, but the mental shift was more intense. Every time Yuna felt the urge to apologize for tripping or for being slow, Kangdi stopped her. "Stop apologizing for occupying space," he hissed, his hand steadying her waist as she nearly lost her footing. "In this house, in this city, you own the ground you stand on. If someone wants it, they have to pay for it in teeth." By noon, Yuna was drenched in sweat, her lungs burning, her left hand throbbing from the unfamiliar tension of the wraps. But as she stood panting, staring at the man who had systematically dismantled her fear for the last 2 hours, she felt a strange, cold spark in her chest. She looked at her cast. It was no longer just a symbol of what Minjun had done to her. It was a temporary weight she was training to carry until she could shed it and become something else entirely. "Again," she said, her voice steadier than it had been since she arrived. Kangdi's lips quirked into the ghost of a smile, a look of genuine, dangerous pride. "Again." As they reset, the distant sound of a phone ringing echoed from the interior of the house. Sangwoo appeared a moment later, his expression grim. The training session ended instantly. The teeth Yuna was growing were about to be tested sooner than she thought. "The Namgil have made a move on the shipping yards," Sangwoo reported. "And they've sent a message. They don't want the territory, sir. They want a trade. The girl for the peace." Kangdi didn't even look at the phone. He looked at Yuna, who was still standing in her fighting stance, her left fist clenched. "Tell them," Kangdi said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper, "that I don't trade with scavengers. I bury them." He turned back to Yuna. "Go upstairs. Get dressed. Not in the silk. In the black gear I sent to your room. Today you stop being the guest. Today you become the reason they regret ever looking for you." The black gear Kangdi had provided was a second skin, tactical, matte, and utterly devoid of the soft vulnerability of her previous life. As Yuna pulled the reinforced fabric over her limbs, the weight of the material felt like an anchor. She stared at herself in the mirror, her afro framed against the harsh, utilitarian lines of the tactical vest. She didn't look like a student anymore. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a shadow waiting for the sun to go down. Downstairs, the mansion had transformed from a palace into a war room. The air was thick with the ozone of electronics and the hushed, urgent murmurs of men in headsets. Kangdi stood over a digital map of the estate, his fingers tracing the perimeter lines with the cold precision of a surgeon. "They won't come through the gates," Kangdi said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to settle in Yuna's marrow as she entered the room. "Namgil is a coward, but he isn't a fool. He knows my front door is a death trap. He'll use the cliffside, the blind spot in the infrared sensors during the shift change." "Sir, if they breach the terrace, the interior line is thin," Sangwoo cautioned, his eyes darting to Yuna. The room went silent. The subtext hung in the air like smoke. The girl is the hole in our armor. For the Namgil syndicate, Yuna wasn't a person, she was a lever. If they could get a knife to her throat, they could force Kangdi to dismantle his empire brick by brick. She was the one thing he had allowed himself to care about, and in their world, care was a terminal illness. "Then we don't let them reach the interior," Kangdi replied, his gaze snapping to Yuna. He walked toward her, his presence overriding the tension of the room. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small, weighted tactical knife in a sleek sheath. He didn't offer it to her hand. He clipped it to the strap of her vest, right against her chest. "Use your left hand. Aim for the soft tissue. Don't think about the man. Think about the space he is trying to take from you." "You think they're already inside, don't you?" Yuna asked, her voice surprisingly level. "I think they've been inside for an hour," Kangdi said. As if on cue, the lights flickered and died. The mansion plunged into a deep, synthetic darkness. The hum of the air conditioning cut out, leaving a silence so sudden it felt like a physical blow. Then, the red emergency lights kicked in, bathing the marble and steel in the color of a fresh wound. "Breach at the North Terrace," a voice crackled over the comms. "They're through the glass, they have jammers, we're blind." "Sangwoo, take the west wing," Kangdi commanded, already moving toward the main staircase. He didn't tell Yuna to hide. He didn't tell her to stay behind him. He grabbed her hand, his grip like iron, and pulled her into the shadows of the gallery. "Stay low, keep your back to the stone. If we get separated, head for the sub-level bunker. Do not stop for anyone, not even me." The first shot was a muffled thud followed by the crystalline shatter of a $3,000 vase. Yuna didn't scream. She felt a strange, cold clarity wash over her. The training on the terrace, the hours of footwork, the lessons in occupying space, it all coalesced into a single instinct: survive. They moved through the gallery like ghosts. In the red light, the men of the Namgil syndicate appeared like demons, dressed in gray urban camo, moving with a jagged, desperate energy. They weren't professionals like Kangdi's men. They were street soldiers, hungry and reckless. Kangdi was a whirlwind of calculated violence. He moved ahead of Yuna, a silhouette of death that struck with terrifying silence. He didn't fire his weapon unless necessary, preferring the brutal efficiency of his hands. Yuna watched him snap a man's wrist with a sickeningly familiar sound, and for a heartbeat, she felt a flash of the old terror. But then she saw the man reach for a blade intended for her, and the terror turned into a sharp, hot anger. "Go, the service stairs," Kangdi hissed, shoving her toward a heavy steel door as 3 more shadows emerged from the balcony. "What about you?" "I'm going to remind them why this house has no exit," he growled, turning to meet the rush. Yuna bolted. She ran through the narrow service corridor, her boots echoing against the metal. Her heart was a drum in her ears. She could hear the chaos behind her, the heavy thuds of bodies hitting the floor, the occasional bark of a suppressed firearm. She reached the landing of the stairs when a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was a man, smaller than Kangdi but wiry, his face obscured by a mask. He didn't hesitate. He lunged for her, his eyes fixed on her injured arm, sensing the weakness. Yuna didn't retreat. She remembered the lesson from the morning. Don't look at his face. Look at his center. As he reached for her, she pivoted on her lead foot, using the momentum of her weight to swing her hips. She didn't have her right arm, but she had her shoulder. She slammed into his chest with the force of a falling tree, catching him off balance. As he stumbled back, his eyes widening behind the mask, Yuna reached for the knife on her vest. Her left hand felt clumsy, but the blade was sharp. She didn't stab, she slashed, a wide, desperate arc that caught the man across his forearm. He hissed in pain, dropping the zip ties he had been holding. Before he could recover, Yuna delivered a kick to his knee, the same kick Kangdi had made her practice until her shins bled. The man's leg buckled. He hit the floor hard. Yuna didn't stay to finish it. She turned and sprinted toward the bunker, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She reached the heavy steel doors of the sublevel, her fingers trembling as she punched in the code Kangdi had taught her. The doors hissed open, and she threw herself inside, hitting the lock button until the seals groaned shut. She collapsed against the door, her lungs burning, the tactical knife still clutched in her left hand. She looked down at the blade. There was a smear of dark blood on the steel. She wasn't a girl in a dirty corner anymore. She was a woman in a bunker, covered in the blood of her enemies, waiting for her king to return from the slaughter. But as she listened to the muffled echoes of the battle above, Yuna realized a terrifying truth. The breach wasn't just in the walls of the mansion. It was in her. The girl who feared violence was dead, and in her place, something much more dangerous was beginning to breathe. She looked at the monitors on the wall, watching the red dots of the intruders flicker and disappear one by one under the shadow of a single, relentless predator. Kangdi was coming for her, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was more afraid of the men who had broken in or the man who was currently killing them all to get back to her. The silence of the bunker was supposed to be a sanctuary, but the air soon began to taste of copper and smoke. On the monitors, the red dots representing the invaders were vanishing, but a sudden, violent shudder rocked the floor beneath Yuna's boots. An explosion, not from the mansion above, but from the foundation itself. The Namgil hadn't just scaled the cliffs, they had tunneled into the old utility veins of the mountain. The steel doors she had just locked didn't slide open. They were blown inward by a focused thermite charge. The concussive blast threw Yuna across the room, her head slamming into the edge of the leather sofa. High-pitched ringing drowned out the world, and her vision fractured into a kaleidoscope of red emergency lights and swirling dust. Through the haze, she felt rough hands seizing her. This wasn't the measured, protective grip of Kangdi. These hands were panicked, desperate, and smelled of cheap grease and cordite. "Got the bitch, move," a voice rasped. Yuna didn't scream. The old Yuna, the girl who had huddled in the corner of a dingy apartment while Min Jun's shadow loomed, would have been paralyzed. But as she was dragged toward the jagged hole in the wall, her mind remained cold. She felt the sharp edge of the tactical knife still clipped to her vest. She felt the weight of her caste. She remembered Kangdi's voice, "Don't be a victim, be an observer." As they hauled her through the dark, cramped tunnels, she didn't struggle blindly. She counted their footsteps. She noted the turns. Right, left, 40 paces, descending incline. She felt the humidity of the mountain air increasing, telling her they were nearing an exit near the water. There were 3 of them. 2 holding her, one leading the way with a low-light lantern. "Namgil is going to skin us if we don't get her to the boat," one of them hissed. His grip on her injured arm was careless, sending jolts of white-hot agony through her shoulder, but Yuna used the pain to stay awake, to stay sharp. They emerged into the salt-heavy air of a hidden cove at the base of the cliffs. A blacked-out speedboat bobbed in the surf. The leader turned, his mask slipping to reveal a face lined with a frantic, sweating terror. He wasn't a soldier. He was a man who knew he was already dead if he failed. "Get her in, tie her to the bench," he commanded. They shoved her onto the damp floor of the boat. As one man reached for a roll of heavy-duty tape, Yuna saw her opening. The man's focus was on her legs, his head bowed. She didn't have the strength to overpower him, but she had the leverage of the boat's edge. She waited until a wave rocked the vessel. As the man shifted his weight to compensate, Yuna drove her heavy, plaster-encased right arm upward with every ounce of strength in her core. The cast, hard as stone, connected squarely with the bridge of his nose. The sound of cartilage snapping was a grim echo of her own injury, but this time she was the one who had delivered it. The man fell back into the water with a choked cry. "Hey!" the leader yelled, reaching for his holster. Yuna didn't wait. She rolled toward the back of the boat, her left hand finding the knife at her chest. She didn't try to fight the leader. She aimed for the fuel line she had spotted near the outboard motor. With one jagged, desperate saw of the blade, the scent of gasoline filled the air. "Stay back," she hissed, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears, low, steady, and vibrating with a lethal promise. She stood up, swaying with the tide, the knife held in a reverse grip. The leader froze, his gun leveled at her chest. "You think you're tough now? You're just a girl. You're the reason the white tiger is going to lose his head." "He's not a tiger," Yuna said, her eyes fixed on the man's center, just as she had been taught. "He's the end of the world, and you brought him right to your door." She wasn't looking at the gunman anymore. She was looking past him, at the silhouette descending the cliff face with the speed of a falling shadow. Kangdi didn't announce his arrival with a shout. He arrived with a silence that was more terrifying than any explosion. He landed on the pier above the boat, a wraith in blood-streaked white and black. The gunman turned, but he was too slow. A single shot from Kangdi's suppressed weapon took the man in the shoulder, spinning him into the surf. The boat was drifting now, the engine dead, the fuel slicking the water. Kangdi leaped from the pier, the impact of his landing shaking the small vessel. He was on her in a second, but he didn't grab her. He stopped, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. He saw the blood on her cast. He saw the knife in her hand. He saw the cold, calculating fire in her eyes that mirrored his own. "Did you do this?" he asked, gesturing to the man groaning in the water and the severed fuel line. "You told me to occupy space," Yuna said, her breath finally hitching as the adrenaline began to ebb. "I decided I didn't want to share it." Kangdi reached out, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly as he tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who had just dismantled an extraction team with his bare hands, looked at her with a reverence that bordered on fear. "You're not the woman I found in that apartment," he whispered. "No," Yuna said, stepping into his space, her head resting against the blood-stained silk of his chest. "That girl died in the hallway. You're the one who decided to wake up what was left." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly she could feel the frantic rhythm of his heart. The Namgil were defeated, the breach was closed, but as they drifted in the dark cove, Yuna realized the transformation was complete. She wasn't his guest, and she wasn't his prisoner. She was the only person in the world who could stand in the center of his storm and not be swept away. "Let's go home," she said. "Not home," Kangdi replied, his voice returning to that low, tectonic rumble. "We're going to finish this. No more shadows, Yuna. From now on, the city learns who you are." He steered the drifting boat toward the shore, and as the moon broke through the clouds, it illuminated two monsters, one born of fire and one forged in it, ready to take back their kingdom. The sky over Seoul didn't turn black that night. It turned a bruised, electric crimson. Kangdi didn't just search for Yuna. He dismantled the city's underworld brick by brick. Every Namgil front, every gambling den, and every silent partner was met with a storm of fire and steel. He moved through the rainy streets like a force of nature, his white shirt now a road map of arterial spray, his eyes devoid of anything resembling humanity. He wasn't a businessman anymore. He was a god of war looking for his heart. While Kangdi razed the city from the outside, Yuna was the blade working from the within. Locked in the back of a moving transport van after the Cove skirmish, her hands were zip-tied, but her mind was a cold, sharpened instrument. She didn't struggle against the plastic. She used the jagged edge of her medical cast, partially shattered from her earlier strike, to saw through the bonds. Every jolt of the van was a countdown. She watched the driver through the small glass partition, nodding the way he slowed down at a specific industrial checkpoint near the old ironworks. She knew Kangdi's tactical style. He wouldn't just follow, he would intercept. As the van slowed to navigate a narrow alleyway leading to the Namgil's primary stronghold, Yuna saw the flickering lights of the Dongpa SUVs cutting through the rain at the far end of the street. The driver panicked, reaching for his radio. This was the opening. Yuna didn't wait for a rescue. She threw her weight against the side door's manual release, which she had spent the last 20 minutes loosening with the metal tip of her sling's buckle. As the door swung open, she didn't jump. She reached for the fire extinguisher bolted to the interior wall. With a roar of defiance, she triggered the pin and hurled the heavy canister out into the path of the following Namgil escort car. The explosion of white chemical fog blinded the pursuit, causing a 3-car pileup that blocked the narrow exit and trapped the lead van in a bottleneck. The van lurched to a halt. Yuna kicked the back doors wide, standing in the fog like a vengeful spirit. Kangdi's car skidded to a stop mere inches from her. He was out of the door before the wheels stopped spinning. He didn't look at the chaos or the men he had come to kill. He looked at Yuna, who was standing over the unconscious driver she had just leveled with her heavy cast. "I gave you the opening," she panted, her face splattered with rain and soot. Kangdi stepped into the light, his silhouette terrifying and magnificent. He didn't say a word. He simply raised his weapon and finished the work she had started, his loyalty written in the blood of the men who had dared to think she was a weakness. He reached for her, and as their hands met amidst the wreckage, the city finally went silent. The hunt was over. The execution had begun. The scars on Yuna's arm had faded to thin, silvery memories by the time the cherry blossoms began to carpet the grounds of the estate. She stood on the obsidian-tiled balcony, no longer draped in the oversized robes of a convalescent, but in a tailored suit of deep emerald silk that complemented the glow of her skin. The heavy plaster cast was gone, replaced by the weight of a gold watch and the cold, quiet confidence of a woman who had looked into the abyss and forced it to blink. She didn't flinch when the glass door slid open behind her. She didn't need to look to know it was him. The air simply changed, growing dense with the scent of sandalwood and the unspoken promise of absolute protection. Kangdi stepped up beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back. He was dressed for the city, sharp, lethal, and immaculate, but his eyes, once frozen over by decades of violence, held a private warmth kept only for the woman who had text-messaged her way into his soul. "The council is gathered," Kangdi said, his voice a low, tectonic rumble. "They've heard the rumors of the Black Tiger. They want to see if the woman who dismantled Namgil's logistics is as formidable as the stories say." Yuna turned to him, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. She reached out with her right arm, the one that had once been broken and useless, and adjusted the lapel of his coat. Her touch was steady, her grip firm. "Let them look. I've spent enough time being a story other people tell. It's time they hear it from me." They walked through the mansion together, their footsteps echoing in a perfect, synchronized rhythm. As they entered the grand hall, the high-ranking lieutenants of the Dongpa stood as one. These were men who had spent their lives fearing only the blade, yet they bowed deeply as Yuna took her seat at the head of the table beside Kangdi. She wasn't his shadow, she was his light, and in the underworld, the light revealed where the throat was softest. She had taken the chaos of their meeting and forged it into a reign that the city would never forget. They were no longer a monster and a victim. They were a dual eclipse, a power couple forged in blood and accidental fate. As Kangdi leaned back, watching her open the first ledger with a predatory grace, he realized he hadn't just saved a girl that night. He had summoned a queen. And as Yuna looked out at the room of hardened men, she knew she would never be small again. The wrong number had led her to the right life, and together they would make the world answer for every bone it had ever tried to break. The end. If you love this story, kindly click on the subscribe button to subscribe to this channel, and also tell me where you are watching from in the comments. And also, stay tuned for more.